Canadian Environment and Climate Change Minister Catherine McKenna sure hates her little nickname, and she thinks it's gender-based harassment. But this brave warrior for women's rights is noticeably silent when the UN Climate Change Conference in Bonn, Germany became a slithering snake pit of real sexual harassment. The annual UN Climate Change Conference just wrapped up in Bonn, Germany. It was an opulent and luxurious affair where the world's leading environmentalists and progressive politicians pat themselves on the back for yet another year well spent finding new ways to tax you, inconvenience you, and control your lives. I know because I was there. I was there to see the diesel-powered and heated tents, the diesel-powered lighting, the luxury riverboat cruises, and the dozens of other hypocritical things that these environmentalists don't want you to do, but have absolutely no problem doing themselves. But I was there from the outside. I was banned from this year's conference because I asked a question, just a single question, of a member of the Canadian delegation last year at the very same conference that was held in Morocco. The UN said my one single question constituted harassment. But I went to this year's conference anyway because, well, for starters, I'm not one to listen to the United Nations bureaucrats telling me what to do. And secondly, because I know I can do as much real journalism from the outside of any of these events as any accredited yet sycophantic media from the inside. But now I'm sort of glad that I was on the outside because it sounds like it wasn't exactly a very welcoming place for women on the inside of this UN conference. Reports are now that at least 10 people reported instances of sexual harassment against them at the UN conference this year. The UN Climate Change Framework Communications Director, and incidentally the same person who banned me for harassment, Nick Nuttall, confirmed there were complaints, saying, and I quote, "There have, to my knowledge, been a handful of complaints here in Bonn. My understanding is that the people concerned, after raising the issue to the UN and other relevant authorities, did not wish to proceed to any further formal process." And the UN climate chief, Patricia Espinosa, said the conference did not have enough money for a dedicated team on sexual harassment. Oh, but friends, they had money for parties, lots of parties. But in other words, they anticipated a need for a sexual harassment liaison unit, but determined it was also not in the budget. Well, isn't that interesting? And I have a sneaking suspicion, although I can't confirm it, that this sort of harassment is a bit of an ongoing problem at these UN conferences, given that on at least 2 separate occasions, the UN warned that there would be a zero-tolerance policy this year for sexual harassment. Now I know that as a result of recent sexual harassment allegations coming out of Hollywood, out of politics, and now even out of journalism, people are far more sensitive to sexual harassment claims lately. But all of this feels like the UN sort of expected it coming. And unless I've misinterpreted it, the statement from the UN climate chief, Patricia Espinosa, indicates, at least to me, that it was something they must have anticipated. Otherwise, why did they say they didn't have the money for a dedicated team? At this year's UN Climate Change Conference, there was something called Gender Day, where the UN reinforced the victimhood complex that many left-wing feminists seem to have with regard to climate change. There were even gender-based events at the UN Climate Change Conference in Bonn, Germany, like this high-level event called the Economic Case for Gender-Responsive Climate Action. I have no idea what that means. Ironically, the UN is constantly prattling on about how climate change hurts women the most, like droughts and floods and severe weather, going around looking for places that women normally congregate, like, I don't know, my nail place or the garden center or the Lululemon store. And it's a bizarro sentiment also repeated by Canada's Environment Minister Catherine McKenna. And in fairness, she was also widely mocked for saying so. But you know what? Whereas I would normally join in the choir of mockery, even honestly leading it sometimes, this time I find myself agreeing with Catherine McKenna and the UN when they say that climate change hurts women the most. Because if conferences dedicated to fighting climate change result in double-digit claims of sexual harassment, they might actually be onto something here about gender-based targeting, except it's not climate change targeting women. It's the climate change industry acting as a predatory force against the females of our species. Anywhere these self-described male feminists and their female enablers gather together, women are really not all that safe. In progressive newsrooms, in Hollywood, and now at climate change conferences hosted by the UN. Oh, and about my friend Climate Barbie Catherine McKenna, well, she hasn't had too much to say about real sexual harassment from her side of the aisle. The only time we hear from her fighting for women's rights is when she feels they are unfairly targeted by inclement weather, or when she doesn't like my little nickname for her, Climate Barbie.
I just would like a commitment that you will not call me names, that you won't talk about the color of my hair, that you won't make fun of me. And the reason I'm asking you not to do this is because I have 2 daughters. All right. That there are lots of girls that want to get into politics, and it is completely unacceptable that you do this.
But when one of her colleagues, either at the UN or even closer to home in the Liberal caucus, are accused of harassment and predatory behavior like Liberal MPs Darshan Kang and Hunter Tutu, well then, McKenna clams right up. Really, it's just like Hollywood at the UN with the lavish parties and the self-congratulations and living in literal sheltered bubbles. And if you spout the official talking points, if you show up and make friends at all the right parties and are progressive enough in your politics, then your behavior is really not all that important. Anyway, give me good old-fashioned chivalry, the kind that wouldn't have let 2 female journalists freeze in the cold for a week in Germany because of their politics, over the feminist, progressive treatment of women any day. For the Rebel.media, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. To catch up on all my coverage from the UN Climate Change Conference in Bonn, Germany, and to help pitch in to cover the cost of our trip there, go to rebelun.com.